Hey, my name is Sunny Aggarwal. I'm the founder of Sikka and builder of Cosmos, and I'm happy to be here at Reimagine 2020.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second edition of Reimagine 2020. I'm going to be one of your hosts today, Adam, alongside my co-founder and CTO of MouseBelt, Galen Danziger. How you doing, Galen?
Oh, hey, Adam. Happy to be here.
All right. So glad to have all of you join us for another exciting discussion. Super excited to have our guest today. I feel like he's a pillar of the community and one of the bright minds in the space. So without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce you to Sunny Aggarwal. How you doing, Sunny?
Hey, thank you so much for having me on.
Cool, man. So for the audience here that may have missed the first conference back in May, please visit ri2020.io, or you can visit the Reimagine 2020 YouTube channel for all 70 plus interviews with industry leaders speaking on blockchain, crypto, market insights, and trends. So feel free to check that out if you missed anything else. But without that, let's go ahead and kick this thing off. First of all, again, Sunny, thank you for taking the time out of your day. Thank you for joining us. This is Reimagine 2020. Appreciate you coming down today.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been great. I mean, I love chatting and sharing my love of blockchain, and it's hard to do that with the lack of physical conferences these days. So happy to use the internet as we should be to communicate that with people.
And that's our goal, right? I'm a big fan of a show that you're on, Epicenter, which we'll talk about later down the road. We've hosted you and the Cosmos community at our office here in San Francisco to do presentations a couple of years ago. So I'm a big fan. I'm glad, I was able to connect with you and have you join us. But let's go ahead and kick this thing off. We have a lot of students and developers, entrepreneurs, founders, tuning into this conference right now. And, tell us about your journey prior, not up until UC Berkeley, and we'll get into that shortly after, but tell us your journey prior to blockchain and how'd you stumble into it?
Yeah, sure. So, I've always been really interested in politics, but at the same time, I was always really interested in computers. And so back in high school, I used to do a lot of robotics stuff. But when I got to Berkeley, I started studying computer science, but I was also doing a minor in political economy. And so when I was, first week of school, all these clubs are trying to get you to join and stuff. And, you join 20 of them and you end up sticking with 2 of them. Right. But one of the ones that I joined was this Bitcoin Association of Berkeley. And it was basically a group of 6 guys. And they would just get around, hang out, get dinner, and just talk about what crazy shit is Roger Ver up to this week, or have you checked out the latest BIP that's happening on Bitcoin? And it was something I was it was way over my head. I remember I walked into my first meeting. I think I joined the club maybe a couple of weeks after the beginning of the school year. And so the first meeting I walked into, they were explaining Kevin Britz. He's still involved with the space. He was explaining how Monero ring signatures work. And wow. I was like, what is going on? I have no idea what's happening. But, afterwards of chatting around with some of the other folks who were there. So Max Fang, Andrew Chu, Philip Hayes, a bunch of other guys. And, they were just telling me about Bitcoin and why it's so exciting. And, for me, it was oh, wow, this is so cool because it's a combination of computer science and political economy. And, I had a little bit of a libertarian bent as well. And so it's wow, this is perfect. Let me get involved. And so, yeah, the club at that time was basically for the first year, it just started, it just kept being this daily, weekly hangout session where we talk about stuff. And basically for the first year, I was very in over my head, didn't know what was going on.
What year is this?
Yeah, this is 2015.
2015, okay. So you hadn't heard of Bitcoin prior to that?
I think I may have heard about it. I think I heard about it in passing. I think maybe the first time I heard about crypto was when Dogecoin sent the Jamaican bobsled team to the Olympics. I think that was the first time I heard about cryptocurrency.
Wow.
But yeah, then, I would hear it in passing. I never really dove into it until I got to college, though.
Yeah. And what was the sentiment there, like during these weekly meetups? Because, Bitcoin, I came across Bitcoin. I was working at the bank in 2013, and I sent a wire. Somebody was buying Bitcoin for $100,000. And I was like, what are you buying? Like, what is this? And he's like, I don't know, my brother-in-law's a broker. Like, he says this is the future. And he dropped 100,000. At that point, I think the price might have been like $200-300. Anyways, point being is that, Bitcoin had already been, gaining some traction and some momentum around that time. So what was the sentiment around when you came across it? Like your friends and stuff, did they own any Bitcoin? Like, were they talking about like blockchain and like Ethereum, or maybe Ethereum hadn't launched it, but maybe it was going to? Like, what was kind of the sentiment and understanding of what it was?
Yeah. So when I joined, so like I said, it was in like 2015. So this was in the like lull in that post 2014 bear market.
Yeah.
And so this club was really small. And people were like not so much talking about price as much. It was mostly a bunch of like computer science nerds and like libertarians. And so, I like talk to people about like, why did this thing happen? Like, the two blockchain clubs at the time were sort of Berkeley and MIT, and like, other schools didn't really have it. And one of the reasons I think it popped up at Berkeley early on is just because of how political of a school Berkeley is. Like, there's always like political undertones on everything you do in Berkeley. And so, I guess like a bunch of the people who are like very libertarian there, like a lot of us were politically motivated. We're like, oh yeah, we're gonna fuck the banks and fuck the government and like
No, that's
kind of and then also this is also like when altcoins were like, so Ethereum was created, but I would say actually most of in that original group of like 5 or 6 in that first year, no, we weren't talking about Ethereum at all.
No.
We were sort of talking about Bitcoin primarily. We'd talk about Monero. We were excited about Zcash because Zcash launched, I think, 2016, right? And so that's one thing we were like we were actually a lot of us were very into like the cryptography and privacy side. And so we were like less into like the scalability and smart contracting. We were like, oh, how do we design how do we design new mixers and like new privacy preserving system? Mimblewimble was also like that that text file was dropped right around that, and so we were all like, oh my god, Mimblewimble is so cool. And so
were you guys on Bitcoin Talk and all that too as well? Or what was it? Yeah, was it Bitcoin Talk?
Yeah, some of the guys were. I mean, to be honest, I never actually got too much into Bitcoin Talk. I was, I'd hang around the Reddit and stuff sometimes, but not too much on the Bitcoin Talk.
And how long had this club, like, so you get there, did the club just start, or had it already been in motion for a couple of years or a year?
The club had been in motion for about maybe a year or two. So this was like sort of Bitcoin Association. And basically, so what happened then was by the end of my freshman year, this club was so small that it kind of just, it disappeared. Yeah. It kind of poofed away. And then that summer after my freshman year, Max Fang, who was the president of that club, he basically said, hey, let's like try this again. Let's try take two. But I think the problem is that this stuff is so niche and difficult for people to understand that's why, a lot more people showed up to that first meeting. We were talking about ring signatures, but like a lot of people didn't show up again. And, I was one of the few people who like stuck with it. But so we decided to start teaching a class at Berkeley. So Berkeley has this really cool program called Decals, which allows any students to go ahead and teach a class on a topic, as long as you go get the backing of a professor.
That's cool.
So Max Fang, Philip Hayes, and I, we basically went, we got Dawn Song, so she works on Oasis now. So we got her to back it, and we basically started teaching a class. And like I said, at this point, Bitcoin, I like understood the very basics, but that summer I basically like deep dove into it. My strategy for when I want to learn something is you sign up to teach it, because if you got to teach something next week, you better learn it this week.
For sure. No, that's kind of the best way. And I think for a lot of, viewers right now watching, whether they're, I mean, all of us still like deep dive into these things, right? Like even prepping for all these interviews, like helps me kind of relive and understand a lot of the speakers that I'm dealing with. So just even researching who I'm talking to lately is just great. And I'm like, yeah, I'll do it, because then you start going into the protocol, then you start breaking it down, and that's one of the best ways is to kind of chat. So this club kicks off, and then you are a co-founder at Blockchain at Berkeley. So maybe you want to touch on that as well.
Yeah, sure. So like I said, Bitcoin Association as a club basically died out. And then we got these new set of people from this class that we started teaching, and basically started a brand new club called Blockchain at Berkeley. The idea was, okay, we're not going to be as Bitcoin focused anymore, and we're going to kind of focus on not just like talking about, crypto over dinner, but we're going to like actually kind of make this a more structured thing. And so we kind of created this new organization. We had a education department, an R&D department, and a consulting department. And so the education department, we kind of focused on doing a lot of the, teaching those courses, and, those courses are still taught up to this day at Berkeley. So, they've been taught for it's been at least like 8 semesters now. So it's like, what we do is we take students from the previous, time the class was taught, make them into the TAs, and then the next semester make them into the instructors. And so there's this like rolling thing where it keeps going. So that's sort of the education department of it. Then there's the R&D department, where we'd sort of be working on sort of new projects and really focusing. It's almost, I would call like R&D almost like advanced education, where that's where we'd be doing these like white paper circles and sort of, going into much more advanced stuff. And then we had the consulting department, and that was really great because it gave a lot of students an opportunity to like work with like some really great companies on talking about and like helping them integrate blockchain and being able to explain the stuff to industry, which is.
How is the support of the school? Because I know it's kind of separate. Obviously, they support you to teach and all that, so there was support. But I think Galen and myself have visited tons of schools and talked with professors and faculty, and some schools are further along, some are just getting their wheels going. What was that the support like from Berkeley? Obviously, they were fully supportive. Was that pretty easy?
They were sort of passive. I mean, so one thing about Berkeley is that Berkeley is a big school. Like it is a huge school. And, I would say to Berkeley, it's just like another club, they're doing their own thing. We would get most of our funding sort of from the consultancy projects that we did. And
I bring this up because there might be students in one of these range of advancement of these schools where like they have a program or they don't, or they're in the middle. So it might just be insightful for them to see like kind of the nitty gritty of you're right, funding, right? And I know you guys we'll get into it right now, like you're working with clients and stuff, driving revenue. Anyway, so go ahead.
Yeah, so exactly. Yeah, we were able to find clients and basically, so I would say, the people who originally start the thing, there needs to be like some level of altruism. Like the early guys who started this club, myself, Max Fang, Ronan, John Allen, like we were all like, let's make this into like the best educational platform for blockchain. And so that was our original motivation. And then as we grow, we need more funding. And that's when we started doing these consulting projects, and that gave in revenue, and that helped subsidize some of the other departments like education and R&D. And then it's great to have at least find one professor who can sort of be your conduit when talking to the university. Because when you're a club, it's hard to talk to the administration. But when you have luckily we had sort of two professors who were really helpful for us. One was Dawn Song. So she works on Oasis, as I mentioned.
And I want to touch on that too after you get through this. Yeah, because that's pretty cool. She has a big time project as well.
Yeah. And then the other was Alessandro Chiesa. So he's like, he wrote like the ZK Snarks paper, and he's one of the co-authors of Zcash. And so so those two professors, like, basically gave us a good way to talk to administration. So like
someone on the inside, someone on the inside, exactly. An ally.
Yeah. So that I think that's really important. And and so that's sort of how the club started. And so basically what we were able to do was get the people from the class. So I think the first semester we had about 80 people in the class.
Wow.
We were able to take about the top 25% who were like interested and like make them into the initial club members. And nice. So having this like pipeline of like education towards like to get the classes to get people interested and like basic level of knowledge, and then after that it's like if you the people who are interested, then you funnel them into the club.
Yeah, it's a little vetting process, you know, kind of gauge their interest and then you know see who really wants to take it further or not. And well, that's great. And it seems like obviously you got a solid team. Like they've been rocking for a little while. Tell me a little bit about how you know you started engaging clients. I mean, you took on some big names, right? Some big corporate clients, and that's pretty. I mean, you know, to go into this student-ran organization, right, and leverage them and pay them like on a monthly retainer, it's pretty cool. So, like, tell me that process and experience. And were you in on those meetings?
So to be quite honest, that was actually the part of the club that I wasn't too involved with. So
Okay.
I ran a lot of the education stuff at the beginning, and then I ran R&D. The people who ran consulting were Ronan and John Allen.
Yeah.
So they were kind of really focused more on bringing in those clients. But you know
But they
what
leveraged
helped
you, right? But they leveraged you, right, in your research, right?
exactly. So what we were able to do is like
solutions.
so we took the material that we created for the student course and adapted it to be sort of what we called it EdCon, like education consulting. So, you know, we had to modify that material quite a bit where like, you know, when we're talking to students, we're explaining to them, okay, this is how the hash functions work. The consulting clients, they don't want to hear that. They don't want to know how hash functions work or like the cryptography behind ECDSA. But, you know, we took sort of this one semester worth of lectures, like, you know, weekly 1 hour lectures, and condense it into like 2-3 hour sessions where we basically be able to go to a new client and basically say like, and you know, they a lot of these clients, they wanted to learn about blockchain because this is, you know, now this is like we're pushing into like early 2017 and blockchain is now like into this buzzword and everyone, all these companies have this like mandate, like, oh, go learn what blockchain is and figure out what we're supposed to do with it. And so, you know, a bunch of students show up and we're like, hey, we'll give you a free like 2 hour session explaining to you what blockchain is. And they're like, okay. And you know, it's always nice to have a good name like UC Berkeley behind you. And so like, yeah, sure, we'll do that. And, you know, we do that 2 hour session, get them interested. Now they get the basics. And then we're like, okay, schedule a follow up with us. And now we can figure out how do we start, what can we start doing with you? Like what your company's needs. And then how can we start building a POC with you guys?
And were you guys building that out too? So you design it, architect, you know, the specs, and then also develop, like integrate and implement it?
Yeah, it would usually be sort of more at the POC level, not at like the production level, but yeah.
No, that's cool. And so, and you've also worked with Professor Song, so Don Song, who runs Oasis. I wouldn't spend too much time, but like, how was that working with her? Because she has a major project.
Yeah, that was pretty good. I did, you know, I kind of wanted to do a little bit more on the research side. And so there I did a project with Don Song. It was called Lucky Chain. So it was sort of this, I don't know if you've heard of the Intel's proof of time. It was sort of like an early version of that where it was using SGX Intel SGX, which is like their trusted hardware platform, to replace a lot of the functions of proof of work mining. To be honest, in retrospect, it was sort of a silly project. But what it did was it gave me sort of my first interaction with building a blockchain. And what's funny was, you know, I was like, I don't know how to write P2P networking and yada yada. And so what we did was we actually just used IPFS as sort of the base layer of our blockchain, which is actually an interesting architecture that I haven't seen anyone do, but it's actually kind of cool to just use IPFS as your like base layer of a blockchain and then build a consensus system on top of it. So I guess I got really involved with, so to be honest, the SGX stuff was like kind of a bit over my head as well at the time. But I got involved with IPFS then. I got really interested in that. Then from there, I got interested in a lot of different storage solutions. I gave a white paper presentation on Storj at the time, posted that online, and that got a lot of like traction and stuff. And so from there, I'm like, wow, okay, people, you know, so far I'd mostly been presenting blockchain stuff to people within Berkeley. but after I posted that presentation online, I'm like, oh wow, a lot of other people are watching this.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, oh, let me go ahead and actually sort of do more of these. We started posting more stuff online and getting a lot of more and more eyes on it.
Nice. I know we got some. We could probably talk for like days on some of this stuff, And so this is blockchain at Berkeley for all of you that are following. This is Sunny's experience here on kicking off co-founding this club, working with clients, teaching courses. Blockchain's on the move here in like like you said 2016.
Yeah, this is like late 2016, early 2017.
Exactly. And then is that when you leave school?
Yeah. So, okay. So yeah, like I mentioned early on, a lot of especially the Bitcoin Association guys, and then because blockchain at Berkeley was kind of founded by like a lot of the same people, we were very Bitcoin maximalist. It's funny. The first time I learned about Ethereum was during the summer of 2016. I was at a hackathon. And I was telling a friend, like, I was into Bitcoin at the time. And I was like, hey, I heard there's this like Ethereum thing. We can like build applications on it or something. Let's check it out. And then, so at this hackathon, we open up reddit.com/Ethereum, and the entire front page is, the DAO just got hacked. The world is burning. Yeah, we got to hard fork the chain. So I found out about Ethereum the day of the DAO attack. And so I open, and so I'm like, okay, I don't know. These guys are crazy. Like, they're talking about hard forking chains, and I'm like, I closed it, didn't look at Ethereum again for like another 8 months. So when I finally got into it again was at Blockchain at Berkeley. We used to do these meetups where we'd get people, guest speakers to come in and teach as well. And so we had, what's his name? Anthony, from Digix DAO. So Digix was like one of the earliest Ethereum projects. And so he came in and basically explained, okay, this is what Ethereum is. This is what smart contracting is. And he gave me sort of my first like, okay, wow, this is actually kind of interesting. And so that summer, so this is now summer of 2017. I'm like, okay, this Ethereum thing seems interesting. I want to kind of learn more about it. And so I started interning at Consensus. While I was at Consensus, I met this guy, Nate Rush, and he and I just really hit it off, and we sort of became super close friends, and we both spent the entire summer just like deep diving into proof of stake, and just like we had this thing where like every day we'd read a white paper and then go like discuss it the next day. And it got to the point where like I was more interested in that than like actually doing my work at Consensus. And so basically midway through the summer, I basically like left my internship at Consensus so I can just keep learning more, like reading more white papers. And it had to do because like, I wanted to work more at the protocol layer stack, because that's what I was super fascinated with, while Consensus was mostly working more at the application layer, like building dApps. And I was just like, so me and Nate, like, we were just both obsessed with proof of stake. We like fangirled over Vlad Zamfir. And so Nate was like, oh, Vlad's CBC Casper, that is just the most elegant thing ever. And I was like, no, but I hear you, but Tendermint, man, this thing it's so simple. We can probably launch this thing by the end of the year. It works. And so, Nate ended up working with Vlad for like 2 years on CBC Casper. And I reached out to the Tendermint team, and I'm like, hey, Tendermint sounds so cool. How can I help you guys build this?
Yeah.
And then they were nice enough to reach back to me, and they also mentioned this whole Cosmos thing that they were building as well. So when I reached out to them, I did not realize that like I knew Tendermint as this like proof of stake consensus protocol. I didn't realize that they were like the same team as this Cosmos network idea.
Yeah.
And then they explained the Cosmos network to me. I'm like, oh my God, this just makes sense. This fits all the issues like I saw with Ethereum during my time at Consensus. I'm like, oh, this actually solves a lot of them. And so I started working with them for the summer. Come August, I was planning on sort of working with them over the summer, or over the school year, part time while in school. The day before classes started, one of my, the syllabi for a bunch of classes came out. For one of them, just computer security class that was taught by Nicholas Weaver. So I don't know if anyone knows. He's like this, like you can follow him on Twitter. He's this like Berkeley professor who like hates blockchain. Like, he'll go on these like long Twitter rants why blockchain is just like so dumb and yada yada. But yeah, so his class, the one of the midterms conflicted with DevCon, and I emailed him like, hey, can I like move this around because I really want to go to DevCon 3, and he's like, no. And I don't know, maybe it had to do because it was a blockchain conference or not, but
Probably.
yeah, never know, but probably. But I'm like, fine, okay, then I just have to drop your class. I want to go to DevCon. I'm like, you know what? This is just gonna keep happening. Like school and the stuff I want to do is gonna keep coming into conflict. So screw it. I'm gonna drop all my classes. And so I dropped out for the semester. I convinced my parents, being like, hey, I'll go back at the end of the year.
Were you learning more? But were you learning more of computer science? I meant to ask you at the beginning, but it's kind of too late.
Yeah.
Were you learning more? Obviously, during this, you taught it. You're reading every day, and for all of those watching, like even to this day, all of us in this space like continue reading blogs, articles, research papers. Like it's just like never ending, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I was learning a lot more, and it was like a sort of a different type of learning. I working with the Tendermint team, I started learning a lot more like just software engineering stuff, and just like deep diving these consensus protocols, right? If you now, like there's been this whole new like so many consensus protocols, but at the time, like you can spend like 2 months and like read like the corpus of like consensus protocol literature, and if you spend some time doing that, you can pretty quickly become an expert in consensus protocols, really.
No, that's cool, and I think Galen's chomping at the bit here, but we're kind of getting up to the nitty gritty. Before I get into we'll get into the technical side of Cosmos and your project coming up. I want to touch on projects that what excites you right now out, whether it's on Ethereum, whether it's in the Cosmos ecosystem, or just other projects in the DeFi space. Before we get to that, you have like an interesting kind of quick human history, right? That kind of probably applies to this blockchain ecosystem as well, starting from like small villages and like economic freedom, with constraints from political restraints as well, and those kind of diminish, and you can have one or the other or both, whatever. So yeah, if you want to give some insight into that kind of your little spiel, it's great.
Yeah, sure. And it kind of also plugs into why I got into Cosmos, like I mentioned, where I thought it solves a lot of problems. So, the story I like to tell, I'm clearly not a professional, what's the word for like anthropologist, right? But this is my toy history of of civilization, which is, we started off in these like villages and kingdoms, relatively isolated tribes, and, sort of off on their own thing. Then what we realized was the larger economic integration leads to economic growth. And the way that we figured out how do we get economic integration was through empires. So you had, by forcing an empire, you get all these things like, standardized measures. You get, basically within an empire is sort of like a free trade zone, essentially. You get fundamentally it gets to the point where it's like, all right, you don't want to trade with us. All right, well, I'll march an army on you and make you trade with us. And the whole like mercantilist system was essentially that. And, this empire world lasted for like, 3,000 years. Then, but, it comes with all these cons of empires. They're very hard to maintain. They're very, they're unstable. It's not great for the people living in them because you're basically subjugated and you have to like pay taxes to the capital. And basically, all this reached a head in like the 1800s, 1900s as weaponry became so powerful that like the empire model of civilization became so disastrous. And so basically the great invention of the 20th century from like a socio-political standpoint was this idea, hey, can we do large scale economic integration without large scale political integration? So allow people to have like politically distinct cultures, like this whole concept of nation states, but still have economic integration. And we did this, and that's what we have today. We have this world of nation states, but we still have a large global economic system. And we did this through a couple of different technologies. So some free trade zones where, and like institutions like, you know, the World Bank and the IMF that basically helped make free trade be a norm globally rather than the exception. Or, you know, at least freer trade, not a mercantilist system. The other is like governance systems like the UN that, like, you know, it's not a governance, global governance, but it's like a system where people can meet and discuss. The other one is, which I'll come back to, which is important, is containerization. So I don't know, people probably don't think about this too much, but probably one of the most important inventions in like human history was in like the 1970s when they created shipping containers. So if you ever go to like a shipping dock, like, you know, if you're near the coast, you go there, you see everything's in these like metal containers, the ones with like their little ridges. And this was basically this standardization process that happened in the 70s where they said, okay, all, you know, it's really annoying to like load, let's say you're loading barrels of oil onto a ship. It's like, oh my god, this is so annoying. But we decided, okay, we're going to put everything into this one standard container, and every ship in the world will be designed to carry this container. Every port in the world will have equipment to unload and load this type of container. And so and now what this did was any port in the world can easily ship goods to any other port in the world. And this is massive. This like made it so you can trade with anyone. And then finally, obviously, is the internet. You know, there's probably no explanation needed where, you know, internet, obviously, like, you know, I can engage in commerce with someone in Mongolia as easily as I can with someone across the street from me. And I hope that blockchain is going to be yet another step in this process of basically allowing for more economic integration without the political integration, especially when you can sort of now create binding agreements without needing any one country's legal system to enforce them. So great, that's the story of human civilization and why it's important. How does this have to do with blockchain, other than, you know, the part that blockchain might enable, part 3? But the other sort of analogy I see here is it's very similar to the development from Bitcoin to Ethereum to Cosmos. So Bitcoin is this V1 of civilization where you get all these different villages, like, who all are doing their own things. You had Bitcoin, which is like sort of the big one. But then you have all these other chains, like blockchains. So you have like Sia coin, which is focused on storage. You have Namecoin, which is focused on namespacing. And, you know, all these like different applications on their own blockchain. But the problem is, how do I want to buy a DNS name on Namecoin with my Bitcoin and point my Sia storage to, like, have it point to something I have stored on Sia. That composability and integration just isn't there. So along comes Ethereum, or like and builds this empire where it says, okay, here's this chain that you can do everything on this chain. And so all these applications are built on this chain. And when you're in the Ethereum empire, you have really great levels of composability, which is leading to a lot of the boom we see in the Ethereum ecosystem, because it's so great to be able to, like, we're having all these interactions between projects that no one could have ever imagined that is happening on Ethereum today. But what you lose is the political like separation where, you get all, like I said, empires are unstable. They don't scale because, human coordination doesn't scale. That's what we see with Ethereum. It's not scaling. Both from like from a technical standpoint, it's not scaling, but it also just doesn't scale from like a political standpoint either. Where
And what you mean by that are, and Galen, you've touched on this too, like how Bitcoin, I forget like the core development, they focus on one thing. Ethereum has like various proposals and like, trying to decide what the next, feature should be added in. And that's kind of what, for people watching, like the political aspect, the governance, will kind of maybe gets bottlenecked a little bit. Right, Galen? You brought that up before. Some of the issues.
Ethereum has a really massive amount of developers all working on their own thing. And sometimes it does combine into new features and some pretty cool stuff. But it's many people all working on independent things that seem to eventually combine together and make some cool features. But it seems less like singularly directed as some other blockchain.
Mm-hmm. And going back to your point, Sonny, on like some of these unstable things and like the human capital that's required to move things forward or not, decisions.
Yeah, upgrades are much harder on Ethereum because of the large scale integration. And what happens is when you do upgrade, some things you might break something. So this sort of happened on the most recent upgrade of Ethereum, where they changed the gas pricing for some of the opcodes on Ethereum, but it broke the Aragon smart contracts because Aragon sort of expected the contract a certain gas pricing to happen, but it changed from under them. And it's really hard in this like large empire, like one chain to rule them all kind of model, to have changes that as the stakeholders and users of the system grow, it's hard to make changes that can take into account the needs of the entire system as a whole. And like also what I mean, also it comes to things like, the parity multi-sig bug, right? Like there's the parity wallets got stuck. It'll be nice to have been able to hard fork to solve it. Really, I know I'm generally of the opinion that, look, if we hard fork to undo the DAO attack, it doesn't seem unreasonable to also hard fork to do this. But as you get these like more and more complex system, it basically, I think Ethereum is unhard forkable today because it'll just break so much stuff that and like, the question is today, let's say there's a contentious fork of Ethereum. Who gets to decide which fork is the right one? I'd say it's like probably like Circle. Like, they get to decide which side of USDC is correct, right? Which one is redeemable. And so whichever side they say for USDC is correct, that's sort of going to be the Ethereum that matters, because like so much of DeFi is dependent on USDC. So it'll be kind of like, so that's sort of what I mean by political unscalability.
Which kind of leads into Cosmos, right? And kind of what you guys have been working on.
Yes, exactly. So Cosmos, our vision is, how can we take the world of V1, where like every application sort of has its own little blockchain, and each community has their own blockchain that they can upgrade at the scale that they need it. They can specialize. That's another important thing that happened in V3 of the world, is specialization. Different countries specialize on different things. That's what Wealth of Nations is about, right? And so what with Cosmos allows is each application on its own chain can specialize to its own application, but then still have a way to interact and be composable with each other, which is what we call the IBC protocol, stands for inter-blockchain communication. But it's essentially designed to, and what it is it's designed to be that containerization we talked about. So how containerization solved like interoperability for like physical shipping ports. Our vision for IBC is that it should be the standardization for how different blockchains talk to each other. So, okay, my blockchain supports IBC, your blockchain supports IBC. Great, we can start to send data and tokens and whatnot across our chain. And so we can kind of build this
Yeah.
composable world, economic integration between blockchains without needing to be all on a single blockchain.
Absolutely, it makes sense. So in terms of how exactly does Cosmos accomplish this? Like, how does it implement this interchange between blockchains?
Mm-hmm. So what we do is we use, it's not that new of an idea. It's an old idea from crypto of side chains, where each blockchain sort of has an on-chain light client of the other blockchain. So a light client is like a client that basically does the minimum amount of verification needed to be like somewhat reasonably secure. So, in the example of proof of work, it's like verify all the headers and then provide a Merkle proof to whatever you're trying to prove. So if you're trying to prove that, hey, this UTXO exists, here's a Merkle proof to a block header, and then here's proof that it's in this the highest proof of work chain. So that same thing. So IBC would be, let's say, Cosmos, a chain that supports IBC. If you want to talk to another chain, we basically, in the state machine of chain A, would it be a light client of chain B? And you basically, if you want to prove to it that, hey, I want to send tokens from chain B to chain A, you'll go ahead and lock them on chain B into like a special escrow contract, send a proof, a light client proof to chain A saying, hey, look, here's proof that we locked it here. And then it will mint you a token on chain A. And then if you want to go back, you can do just the reverse, where you burn the token on chain A, you prove it to chain B and saying like, hey, here's the light client proof that I burned it. And then it'll unlock that token out of escrow back for you again.
Oh, very cool. So you can essentially interact just sort of using Cosmos as a bridge and call in Ethereum, you could call in a smart contract a locked asset from Bitcoin or any other chain that you support then.
Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. So, and one of the things is that IBC is sort of, it does make the assumption that it works when both chains support IBC. So chain A has to natively support IBC and chain B has to support IBC. It becomes a little bit more complicated when you're trying to have a chain that supports IBC talk to a chain that doesn't support IBC. And that's, let's say Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't really support IBC, and I don't know if it ever will, like if it will ever natively support IBC. So for that, you need to do like sort of these hacky workarounds. Meanwhile, with Ethereum, like, at the base layer, it does not support IBC right now, but you can implement IBC into a smart contract. So eventually we can have Ethereum sort of semi-natively support IBC through smart contract talking to a chain that natively supports it.
Yeah, very cool. So in terms of Cosmos, where is it at right now? Is it live and doing these cross-chain transactions?
Yeah.
So what chains? Or here, go ahead.
Yeah. So where Cosmos is at right now is, so I guess, so I mentioned the IBC portion of Cosmos. I'd say Cosmos sort of has three, when we set out, there was three tools that we decided that we needed to make in order. So Cosmos is our vision of this whole many chains interoperating. And so we're like, okay, to make this work, what are the tools we need? We decided on three of them. One was Tendermint Core, which is this consensus protocol, because we really believe that proof of stake is the future. And we wanted a BFT consensus protocol that has efficient light client proofs. And so that's what Tendermint was for. Then the second we did was the Cosmos SDK. So if you wanted, we had this vision of many blockchains, each with their own application. The problem is, back in 3 years ago, if you wanted to write a blockchain application, you sort of had three options. Either you write something from scratch, which is really hard. Two, you write it on Ethereum, which is what we're trying to get away from. Or three, you fork the Bitcoin code base and try to hack your solution onto there, and that was very messy. So this is sort of what like Namecoin did, right? Like they forked the Bitcoin code base and like added the name service onto there, but it's so hacky and doesn't make sense because it's not a code base that was designed for that. So the Cosmos SDK was basically, we said, okay, we need to build a toolkit that makes it easy for anyone to build their own blockchain. And so that's what the Cosmos SDK was. If you want to write your new application, we make it super simple for you to write your own brand new blockchain. And third was IBC, which is this interconnection protocol. So where we are today is we are done with like 2.75%. So Tendermint Core and Cosmos SDK have been sort of those. We finished Tendermint Core first. That was step one. Then we did the Cosmos SDK. That was done about a year and a half ago. And now there are many chains that are launched with the Cosmos SDK. So the Cosmos Hub is one, but then there's the Binance chain, Kava, Terra, a bunch more. I can't even keep track anymore. Now the third step is IBC. So that's basically what we've been working on for the past year and a half, is building IBC, building an integration for the Cosmos SDK, but then also for other frameworks as well. So now people are building it for frameworks like Substrate and whatnot. But yeah, so the goal is IBC should be ready for production level in the next, I don't like to give timelines, but definitely by this year, like by the end of the year for sure.
Oh, cool. And in terms of those other parts, like Tendermint, I mean, you talked about Binance Chain being built around it. This is probably one of the more interesting projects that I've seen come out of a blockchain. I see it on Jesper actually getting validated as a distributed system, and is working pretty well where I've seen other projects fail. What went into building Tendermint and getting it validated and this whole process?
Yeah, so Tendermint was sort of very early. It was one of the first. So one of Jay Kwan, who is sort of the founder of Tendermint, one of his insights was, there was all these like BFT consensus protocols from like a lot of researchers done on this stuff back in like the 80s and 90s, but they kind of required a permissioned validator set, and they didn't really scale that well. And so people kind of, didn't bother with it and just kind of put it off to the side. And then, fast forward 20 years and Bitcoin comes out, and it uses a completely brand new consensus model of like, I call it Nakamoto consensus, of this whole longest chain like system. It's like probabilistic. It's a very different class of protocol than the BFT protocols. What Jay realized was, hey, you can combine this. And then, after Bitcoin came out, there were people who kind of came up with like proof of stake, which, like, I guess some of the early ones was like Sunny King came up with this project called Peercoin. And it kind of basically tried to do this proof of stake system with Nakamoto consensus. Jay realized, hey, wait a second, we can use proof of stake to make the BFT protocols from the 80s and 90s permissionless, which is really interesting because, like, it's not this, because that was one of the big problems with them is, for building permissionless networks is, so great, we can use proof of stake to make it permissionless. Now, how about the scalability thing? So it turns out what Jay and Ethan Buckman, who was the CTO of Tendermint back then, they basically spent like 2 years building Tendermint as a production implementation. It turns out most of the consensus protocols, like BFT protocols written in the 80s and 90s, were like written by like some PhD student for their thesis or something, and it was just written as this like prototype, maybe in like Python or something. And it's like, they weren't meant to scale. Meanwhile, Jay and Ethan Buckman, they basically decided to write it in this like production grade Golang multi-threaded architecture all like, just adding some modern software engineering, like
Some upgrade.
implementation to it. Yeah, and it turns out, hey, this thing actually can scale reasonably well. Like we can scale to thousands of validators across like the world and whatnot. And so that's sort of what they did. And then they like modified the consensus protocol to like, make it better for a blockchain standpoint. So like, PBFT, like, which is sort of the precursor to Tendermint from the 90s, it like assumes like point-to-point connection, that every node has a direct connection to every other node. Tendermint is designed to work better in like a peer-to-peer gossip network, which is what blockchain systems use. So yeah, it basically like did a lot of like modifications to make it work well for a blockchain environment, and sort of was just the first production grade implementation of this. And then following that, after Tendermint sort of laid that groundwork for BFT consensus protocols for blockchains, then it opened the floodgates that way more consensus protocols started being built. And I would say like almost every new consensus protocol that comes today is usually some sort of variant. It's heavily inspired by Tendermint, whether it's like Casper or like Polkadot's Babe, or I'd say like maybe the only truly novel consensus protocol that's happened in the last 10 years other than Tendermint is probably Avalanche, but that's a whole story for another time.
And what was your involvement with a lot of this development and design stuff?
Yeah, so I joined, like I said, summer 2017. And so Tendermint was sort of already being built by Jay and Bucky for a couple, like almost like 2 years before that point. And so we had like something there, but I got involved with a lot of sort of improving Tendermint, coming up with new ideas of how to just make it better for blockchain environment, how to add things like time, like BFT time and things like that. But then what I was really mostly involved with was the Cosmos SDK. So it's when I joined that we started kind of coming up with this idea of like, hey, let's build an SDK to make it really easy for people to build blockchains. So we started doing that. I helped architect a lot of the Cosmos SDK, as well as a lot of the modules of the Cosmos SDK, like staking and governance, and just a lot of the core modules that sort of anyone who's building on the Cosmos SDK will want to use. And so did a lot of work on that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So in terms of, I guess, in terms of all of these Cosmos offerings, what do you think is going to be the most like revolutionary or impactful on the whole blockchain ecosystem?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I would say it's a bit hard to tell, but I mean, I would say that each of these, I would say probably Tendermint, because I think Tendermint basically just Tendermint and proof of stake. So I'd say like, we basically launched the first BFT proof of stake system. And now every blockchain that is launching today is launching with like proof of stake and with BFT. And so I would say that like Tendermint just fundamentally changed the entire like ecosystem and like how consensus protocols are done today. So I'd say probably that's going to be the most long-term like revolutionary. And then I guess what I'm saying is that so far, that is the one that has been like, yes, this is true, that BFT proof of stake was the way. Now we're basically still in the process of seeing of the Cosmos SDK. It has traction, like we have a lot of projects using it, Binance, and we have some projects shifting away from Ethereum to using the Cosmos SDK. So like, Aragon or Enigma. So, but that's still a thesis that is yet to be fully validated. And then the IBC, that's when that comes out, we'll see if our thesis there is also correct or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with that. Tendermint has been huge, completely like projects working, like building based off of this. Like the whole Binance chain has really proven it out.
So by the way, Binance
Um,
uses the Cosmos SDK, not just Tendermint. So Binance Chain is also a good example of like helping prove the thesis that the Cosmos SDK is a better development environment than the EVM. But we'll see how even today, I guess, like still more projects obviously build on the EVM than do the Cosmos SDK, and so we're trying to see, okay, how to improve the developer experience, and then we also think IBC will be a big part of it. The reason a lot of projects continue to build on Ethereum is the composability. You really want that composability with other applications, and so maybe when IBC comes along, that will be the trick.
oh, absolutely. And then I got one final question for you before I hop back to Adam. So you're currently working on another project right now, sort of in the Cosmos ecosystem. What exactly is this new project that you're working on, and what are you doing exactly there?
Yeah, sure. So I wouldn't say it's a project. It's a company. It's called so it's called Sikka. So Sikka is basically, it's a company I started basically a year and a half ago while I was still working full time at Tendermint, the company, working on Cosmos. And what we started doing there was running a validator for different Cosmos based blockchains. Because and I started it as this sort of way of being like, okay, well, I'm designing all this proof of stake stuff. I should probably run a validator so I can be like a user of my own software and architecture and stuff, so I can understand it better. And so that's why I started Sikka and started validating on a number of proof of stake chains, especially within the Cosmos ecosystem. And and so basically was doing that on the side for about a year. And then last month I left Tendermint, the company, because I've been working on protocol layer development for, almost 3 years at that point. And I kind of wanted to shift to working more now on application layer stuff. And so that's why I left. And the idea was Sikka is, we're still working on the validators, but at the same time, we're starting to sort of explore some new projects on the application layer, which is kind of what we're really excited about next.
Oh, very cool. Are there any types of applications that you're planning on building out?
So there's a couple. One of the things that we're really interested in, especially, is reputation systems. Like we're just obsessed with like reputation networks and web of trust and things like that. So we're interested in exploring a couple of different projects that involve reputation systems. And Dave, my partner at Sikka, he is like a zero knowledge expert, like probably one of the best zero knowledge people in the world. And so really trying to design some identity reputation systems that are privacy preserving and things like that. And meanwhile, on the side, like I mentioned, still working on our validator. So, as ETH 2.0 is coming, we're working on building staking services, staking pools for ETH 2.0, because, we highly encourage people to run validators themselves. But, obviously, I think a lot of people maybe don't want to run their own validator. It's a lot of hard work, to be honest. And so being able to delegate. So one of the things I spent a lot of time doing on Cosmos, what is basically like designing delegation. Like in the Cosmos SDK, the staking protocol, the default staking module in Cosmos SDK has inbuilt delegation. But for some reason, the Ethereum 2.0 developers decided against in protocol delegation. They don't want delegation, but I think they're a little bit misguided, because I think delegation is inevitable. But because it's not in protocol, now we have to do all these sort of more hacky and ways of building delegation out of protocol. And so we're also spending some time developing those right now.
Okay, yeah, very cool. Here, I think this is all the questions I've got. I think I'll pass it back to Adam now if you have any additional questions.
Yeah, do you have a hard cutoff? I don't want to run over. I mean, we're going over, but I'm having a good time. Are you cool?
Yeah, I'm good.
Awesome. Yeah, no, interesting stuff. I think, as you mentioned, that standardization, the interoperability, you're working on, you're starting to, this validator, proof of stake validation is pretty big right in the space. So what are you following now? Like, we just talked about protocol stuff, which you love. You just switched over to, proof of stake, validator as a service, validation as a service. What's exciting you? Like, what else are you watching in this space? DeFi is kind of coming up. Blockchain or DLT, right, touches a lot of aspects. Whether it's cryptocurrency in the Bitcoin application, whether it's at the corporate level, which is a little bit different. We don't have time to get in all that. But yeah, what are you following right now? What excites you outside of what we just discussed?
Yeah. So I've been pretty closely following all the sort of developments within DeFi, especially within like the Ethereum ecosystem. And I'm like my opinion on it is kind of a little bit medium-ish. Like there's some things that I really like. Like I'm a big fan of a lot of the developments on exchanges and stuff like that. Uniswap, different automated market makers. Really interested in following a lot of the developments that are happening there. My general view on a lot of like DeFi is I think we need more reputation-based systems. So I think currently in DeFi, there's a lot of focus on trustlessness as like one of the main selling points or like points of like DeFi and blockchains. When I would say trustlessness is not the main goal to me. I think the two main like sort of, North stars would be openness and transparency. And that's what I think like DeFi should be focusing on. And if you have really good on-chain reputation systems and networks, you can create systems that give actually, the less trustlessness because you're building trust systems on chain, but they're open and transparent trust systems. And that's where I think this DeFi space really does need to go.
Galen, I don't know if you caught any of that, but he was talking about reputation. Like we're talking about DeFi, what excites him, what he's following. And he brought up reputation. I know you have some thoughts. I know we worked on some things in the past and kind of, not giving it priority, but, leveraging this type of concept in the blockchain. What were you just saying, though, Sonny, about including that into DeFi as far as how it would help?
So, for example, like, there's all these like lending protocols on blockchains right now on like, this Compound and Maker and Aave and stuff. But the problem is all these currently require over collateralization.
Yeah.
Which is, it's okay for some use cases, but like, if I want to go get a loan to like start my business, it doesn't make sense for me to over collateralize with like this liquid asset. So it's a little bit silly. So, but to get to an under collateralized world, we need like things like credit scores. Credit scores are basically a form of reputation system, but they're like a centralized one where it's like, okay, there's like these like three companies that basically control like the entire credit scoring system. And, it's very hard. They don't have any competition. They're not very like privacy preserving that. So how can we build, a competitor to credit scoring, but in a decentralized, in a like open and transparent way?
What do you think?
It's almost like transparency and privacy preserving sound like almost opposites, but I think like there's ways you can design systems. You want both, where you want transparency on some attributes of a system, but you want privacy on certain attributes of a system. And so finding the right balance between and just also just technically constructing systems that are this like almost weird sounding transparent but private.
You're muted.
I think there's definitely a huge value there. I mean, we for sure, you can't give out a over collateralized business loan like you were saying before, and I think there's many places where right now we can only make assumptions of users based on the assets they have right now, and bringing in like a history would add huge value to the DeFi ecosystem. So I definitely agree with you there. And you're saying there's a compromise between privacy and transparency. How do you think this would get implemented if you were to build one out yourself or to guess at how this might work? How would you do it?
Yeah, mostly through like cutting edge cryptography, like zero knowledge proofs and like MPC and stuff. So like Zcash is an example, right? It's like, it's transparent in the sense that like, you know, you're able to verify the attributes of the system you care about, such as all transfers were valid and, you know, the total supply didn't change, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, you know, specific attributes such as, okay, who transferred coins to who or what amount, those remain private. And so zero knowledge proofs are sort of this very powerful tool that can like help us out a lot with some of this stuff. And then, you know, MPC computation. So if you wanted to do computation over some data set where the data itself is private, but you can compute over private data, but create some like public result, that's really valuable. So let's say, I don't know, let's say you had a bunch of people, you wanted to get the average of whatever their, you know, they all had some number, that credit score. You got this group of people. You don't want to find out their individual credit scores, but you wanted to like get the average of this group. So, you know, a lot of some of this new cryptography can allow you to do computation over private data.
Oh, very cool. Sorry.
Go ahead.
That's a very cool concept. I think definitely there will be probably a Equifax or like maybe a blockchain version of a credit scoring or credit application eventually. I don't know what it would look like, if there would be one, if there would be many, but I think nobody is very pleased with how they work right now.
Exactly.
Let's build it, Galen.
Absolutely.
No, thanks for answering that. And that's kind of what I've been asking a lot of our speakers and you know, interviewers is like, you know, we've gone through the last few years and here we are. We have staple companies and custody solutions and wallets, exchanges, and the, you know, the groundwork is being laid and has been laid. And so I was just curious to know, you know, what you mentioned. I was talking to Galen yesterday, and I don't know if it's possible too, and I was just asking him, just picking his brain. You know, that's a good one though, like a decentralized kind of credit score, right? So you don't have to over collateralize. And because if you're gonna over collateralize, like you can probably just use it outright, which you don't want to use your capital, or you have a bad reputation and you gotta like stake it, right, in a way. Another one I thought too was like insurance, like decentralized insurance, which I don't know if that's possible. You know, just to provide a peace of mind, which I know QuantStamp is doing like some smart contract stuff, but it's just good to know for all of our viewers, right? We just kind of went through this whole spectrum of the Cosmos and like products and we've all been listening to DeFi, the Aves which we had on, and you know, the makers which we had on, and all the Uniswaps, and which is really cool. So I also kind of want to pivot a little bit to, you know, you doing these interviews with a lot of these projects, and I'm assuming, you know, you've been on Epicenter for quite some time. For all of you that don't know, Epicenter is an OG podcast from like 2014. And everybody that you can think of in the space has been on. How's that experience been for you? I think you joined in 2018, a couple of years now.
Yep. Yeah, it's been pretty great. It's, you know, I do it because, like I mentioned near the beginning, like if I want to learn something, sign up to teach it. And, I'm not exactly teaching on a podcast, but, you got to like prep for an interview and stuff.
Exactly.
And if I didn't do Epicenter, I'd be very like, so focused on like Cosmos or proof of stake and just like heads down on like those topics. But doing Epicenter forces me to learn a little bit about everything in the space. So, one week I'll do an episode on something that's going on in DeFi. Next, I'll do it on some new consensus protocol. Next, I'll do it on, something going on in the Lightning Network or something like that. So just constantly it's like a nice forcing function to help you keep up with such a broad swath of the space. And yeah, just really nice to be able to share my knowledge with like other people who listen to it and stuff.
And I'm kind of getting a taste of that doing all these interviews and like just chatting with people, especially like this, kind of informal, but insightful, getting perspectives. Do you have any favorite guests? Do you have any like, I don't know, any memories that you remember, favorite guests or something?
Yeah. So I guess maybe one of my favorite episodes was with Mark Miller of Agoric. So Mark Miller, he's this like cypherpunk OG, like he did like he worked on like Xanadu and like did a lot of stuff with object capabilities. If you ever opened like your Finder on like a Mac, and you know how you have like the window and you pick a folder and open, those are called Miller windows because like he created a lot of that. So he just has like some really great stories and like very interesting view. And so he's working on this new project called Agoric. It's part of the Cosmos ecosystem actually, but and so yeah, that was a really great interview. I really enjoyed doing that one with him. And yeah, there's just so many that like I did I just found because it was so recent, but I did one with Balancer. And Fernando, I love Balancer. It's such a cool protocol. And so,
do you get to pick the guests, or do you have a team that or a little bit of both?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, so currently we have 5 hosts, and each episode does like 2 hosts, and we will, basically we'll have like a call like once a month or so. We'll just shoot out guest proposals, as long as like, when the team has any objections, we'll go ahead and reach out to the guest and like.
Yeah, that's super cool. And let's see here. Like, there's a lot of these students watching and stuff. Like, what are some good sources of information that you may, not to put you on the spot, but there might be some books, there might be some blogs, some people you follow, I'm sure. Where can people kind of and Google's Google, like you can find it anywhere, but you might have some specifics that you tap into, Telegram chat groups. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Follow you.
I guess that definitely like, read as many white papers as possible. That's usually some of the best source of knowledge. A lot of blogs. If you want to be up to date, you have to be on Twitter. Like Twitter is where discussions happen.
Yeah.
And if you just want to be up to date on stuff, that's where you sort of have to be. So definitely like that's what I did was, got on Twitter, start interacting with people, just start commenting on people's stuff and getting into conversations. And then when you like, I guess when conferences start again, you'll start going to conferences and you'll be like, oh, I know you from Twitter. We had this discussion about this or whatnot. So doing that is probably the best way to get involved. And yeah, just teach things like, if there's something you want to learn about, read the paper, maybe do a short 30-minute presentation on it and upload it to YouTube, shoot a link to the team, like the project team, and they'll probably, share it or retweet it or whatever. And
or you'll get some feedback. Or you get some feedback and you work better than you learn. No, that's kind of one thing I wanted to touch on, which we touched on at the beginning of you teaching, for all of those watching, right? Like kind of one thing that I'm taking away is, and it's not even old, it's just if you want to learn something, teach it, right? That's kind of the best way. And there's pros and cons to it. Like, I think people are afraid, well, I'm not an expert. Like, I don't know. Well, that's kind of the point. Like, you're going to get some feedback. You're going to get in discussions. It's going to open your mind up a little bit from what you learned to maybe an expert that can teach you a few things. and now it's just kind of snowballing. I'm really loving these interviews, honestly, because like you said, same thing, maybe start interviewing people. It helps you, or not interviewing people, but like, bringing on guests, and whether it's a podcast or just reaching out to a project, asking them questions. You kind of dig deeper and you go down this rabbit hole of understanding that business, which leads you into other, liquidity pools, and like now you're into staking, and now you're into exchanges, all over the place. So that's kind of one thing that I hope some people take away from here. And I kind of want to start, I'm going to wrap this up right now in a couple minutes. Everybody's kind of last question, everybody's sheltering in place, and schools, we don't know what school's going to look like, a little bit remote. Founders have probably found it a little bit tough to raise some money over the last few months, or getting a little deterred a little bit from like their goal, right? And I've said this before, what's some advice for a lot of these projects? You decided to go into the workforce. There might be some people contemplating that, and that's kind of been, people that know what they want to do tend to go into the workforce, not a problem. But just to kind of name off some companies, right, that have survived during recessions and depressions and like bear markets, are like MailChimp, Uber, the Groupons, the Instagrams, right, the Venmos, the list goes on, Pinterest, Square, Airbnb. Like they came out of like shit times, right? Everybody thinks some of these companies just, everything was perfect with all these, and it wasn't, right? Like everything was down. So what are, as we kind of conclude on this, what are some of your thoughts for a lot of these entrepreneurs and founders, like either trying to go into the workforce and maybe a little bit hesitant, or, a little bit down because, we're in this pandemic and you can't go to meetups and all that. What do you say to, and I just mentioned companies that have been successful, like major companies. What do you say to some of these people kind of on that borderline of like, what do I do?
Yeah. That's a good question. So, I mean, we're in this like semi bull market now in crypto, I feel. But I would always, be hesitant. Like, things are, especially like just the larger geopolitical stuff, the stock market is also doing like this crazy stuff when it really doesn't make any sense. And so be a little bit hesitant, but, especially if you're about to go back to school, it's like, why? Like, you're going to be doing your schoolwork virtually, like, and paying full tuition for it. That's definitely not worth it. You should probably.
I think half the part of going to school is meeting other like-minded individuals and opposites, like, forming commodities and talking, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, well, if you can't do that, you might as well take the risk and just like start working on something for a little bit. Start your own project, or if you find a project that you thought is really interesting, like, a small team, just like reach out to them and like,
For sure.
And, that's what I did with Tendermint. When I reached out to them, it was a small team, maybe like, I think 6 or 7 people at the time as well.
Especially into like the development efforts and like coding and engineers and design and architecture. Like it's a hands-on thing. Like, you can YouTube it, you can read it up. There's documentation out there. There's GitHub, like open source stuff. Anybody can jump into it. It's just what you do with it. Like you have all the tools out there, right? One thing that you need to do is really, like you said, try something, build something, fail a few times.
And what's really great is like, you can come in with like you don't have to be a crypto expert to get started. So, for example, Pong, who is he was the first engineer, he was the first hire of Tendermint. So after Jay and Ethan started the company, Pong, he was a web developer, and so he was hired, and designer, and so he was hired just to sort of build the website and stuff for Tendermint and do the design work. And fast forward 3 years later, today he is actually the CEO of Tendermint, and so he's actually like, over the last 4 years, he's just become learned so much about crypto, and is now leading this like Cosmos development company. And so, this, whatever your skill set is usually a role for you somewhere in the crypto space, whether you're a web designer or DevOps or economist or mathematician or
business development, like some marketing roles, which we've learned. Like I didn't get into the question, but Ethereum's pretty large because they have the reach of onboarding developers and like documentation and like education and community feeling. Anyways, going back to the role, there's a lot of these roles that are super important, especially in the crypto space, to like get everybody developing on your platform. A lot of communication, a lot of outreach, a lot of, you know, growth hacking, and like, you know, just being involved and staying at the store at the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool, man. Well, where can people find you, Sonny?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. Is probably the best. SunnyA97. And you can check out Epicenter as well. The site is epicenter.tv. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you again joining. I know we went like way over, but this was a great discussion. You know, all of you tuning in to Reimagine 2020. We hope you enjoyed the talk with Galen Danziger, CTO and co-founder of MouseBelt, along with Sunny Aggarwal, which, you know, part of the Cosmos community, Tendermint, Epicenter, blockchain at Berkeley, all of the above. You know, one of the pillars in the community, and I was very fortunate to get him on board here because I really wanted to talk to him. I listened to him on Epicenter, so great voice, great person. And yeah, so thank you all for joining us, and we hope you had a good time. Please visit RI 2020 to catch the full interview, and we hope to see you again. We'll be doing this every month. Thank you, Sunny, for joining. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.